to our final week of this class. Hope you've gotten something positive out of it, and I have abandoned any hope that I will ever get through all the stuff I planned on getting through this material. That's kind of how it works when I teach. If you've ever been to my house, I carry that philosophy into my projects around the house as well. I just never seem to finish much of what I start. But hope you found it informative. What I want to do today in this last session is go over the issue of gender, which has become the big issue when it comes to church and culture, even before critical race theory. Well, I guess they're probably tied right now for influence, but this is the one that has been the big barometer of how the church is impacting culture or not. But before I do, I want to mention a couple things I hadn't meant to. Is Kurt here? Earlier, a few weeks back, if you recall, I mentioned that Kurt got a response from one of the Supreme Court justices, the newest one, Amy Coney Barrett, thanking him and Civil Servant Ministries for putting her on the prayer list that's distributed. And he got another one a week later from another U.S. Supreme Court justice on the other side of the aisle, Elena Kagan. And the wording, Kurt was very encouraged by that. He was also encouraged that the wording was completely different, so they don't just churn out the same letter, the same response. It was a genuine response from her office. So it's good to know that that ministry is reaching every aspect of our government, because we know that they can use it certainly. So let's go ahead and open in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I'm thankful for these past few weeks where we've discussed the role of the church in the culture. I thank you for the learning experience it's been for me. I thank you for the many ways it's caused me to challenge or confirm my thinking. That's always a healthy thing, to think things through. I pray that this class the people here have been blessed by it as well. I pray you be with this class today, with Jonathan's class, with all of the other ones that are meeting now, that we would have a greater appreciation and understanding of your word and the people who bring it to us. I pray you just bless us today. Thank you for the lovely weather as well. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Well, last one. Figured since this will be the last time I'm up here for a while, I might as well do something like this. I laughed out loud literally when I saw this, and I thought, I can't wait to share it with you on Sunday. And then I saw about 3 or 4 of you put it on your social media page. So CDC now recommends wearing a seatbelt even when you're outside the car. Thought this was, with all the controversy over wearing a mask even after you get the vaccine, I thought that was pretty funny. I am saving the Who Said It quote. Normally I follow this up with the Who Said It quote. I'm saving that for the end because it has to do with our topic. But our verse passage for the week, I thought this was most appropriate to end things on, Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. On your handout that I gave you, on the front, I have included not only that verse passage, but some other sources that I found very useful during the class. I hate to even confess this, it makes me seem like not a very legitimate historian. I use Wikipedia for some of this stuff, but I always tried to verify it with other sources. But I found these sources to be most helpful. So if you're interested in doing a deep dive into any of these subjects on your own, I would suggest a lot of these sources. Last week, I ended off with talking about Roe versus Wade. I wanted to mention abortion just a little bit before we moved on, as well as the death penalty and some other issues there. I found this chart to be fascinating. I wouldn't say encouraging because it's still not at the very bottom, but this is the number of abortions in the United States starting from when Roe versus Wade happened in the 70s. And I don't know if you can see that very well. Number of abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44 years. And if you'll notice, it peaks right at 1980 and 1981. And ever since then, for the past 40 years, it's been going down. The actual number has been going down. And they attribute this to several things. Some people want to say, well, it's because there's more access to birth control. Other people say it's because that's about the time that the church got more involved in trying to influence culture. Maybe both, maybe more of one than the other. But you'll see some spikes on the way down, but right now it's at 13.5 abortions per 1,000 women. So like I said, you can say that's encouraging, but if it's anything more than zero, not so much. It's not just that I personally want a law on the books. I just don't want there to be any demand for it. I just don't want there to be any period. I don't want a woman to ever think that that's even an option. So, a couple of statistics here. In 2016, 2/3 of the abortions were performed at 8 weeks or less. 91% of them were performed at 13 weeks or less. A 2018 Gallup poll had pro-choice or pro-life about equal, about 50-50. And that surprised me because I thought it would frankly be a little more on the pro-choice side, the way you see things on the media and whatever. But this was a poll that the Guttmacher Institute did in 2004. Those are really small numbers. I apologize for that. But they asked women, what is your reason for having an abortion? And you could answer more than one, obviously, because these numbers don't add up to 100, more like 500. Having a baby would dramatically change my life. 3/4. That's why they said they wanted an abortion. It would dramatically change my life. Can't afford a baby now. 73%. 48% don't want to be a single mother or having relationship problems with the father. Have completed my childbearing. Not ready for another child. Don't want people to know I had sex or got pregnant. On and on and on. And if you look at the very bottom, 1%, I was a victim of rape. Less than 0.5%, incest. And when you see the people who advocate for freedom of choice today, what is the rationale, right? Well, it's because of rape or incest. 12% concerns about health. So I just thought that was interesting that the rationale that we want everybody to have that access is something that apparently few people are experiencing. Today, it's legal, but states may restrict it to varying degrees. And a lot of these restrictions are second or third trimester restrictions or late-term abortions. They have issues with notifying the parents if you're a minor. Mandated disclosure of abortion risk info beforehand. There are some states who have a problem with telling a woman the possibilities before this procedure happens. We would be in the blue here in this Illinois map. Teen must notify parents or guardians 24 to 48 hours before the procedure. The sad but true fact about this, one of them, is that a majority of the abortions in America today are obtained by women who identify as religious. According to this study, more than 7 in 10 U.S. women report some type of religious affiliation. 37% Protestant, 28% Catholic, 7% other. For Protestant women, it's 15 per 1,000 women. Catholic women, it's 20 in 1,000. Their rates are much higher among minority women. Hollywood and academia not only supporting abortion rights still, but glorifying their experiences. That's why I have these two images here. This became a thing a couple years ago, the notion of shout your abortion. They were proud of it. And the woman pictured up there is Michelle Williams, an actress who was in the process of winning a Golden Globe. I don't know if you ever watch these award shows anymore. But she got up to accept her Golden Globe, and she's pregnant in this picture. And she mentioned in her speech how grateful she was that she had the abortion she had so many years ago because it allowed her success in her acting career. And this, when people applauded and all that. So that's the kind of world we live in today. I have a list here. I had this on your handout last week. Some religious groups who are opposed, with few or no exceptions: Assemblies of God, Roman Catholics, Mormons, Hindus, Missouri Synod Lutherans, Southern Baptists, abortion rights with few or no limits, conservative Judaism, not Orthodox Judaism, but conservative Judaism, Presbyterian Church USA, Unitarians, UCC, and then you have others either in the middle or no clear position at all. So that's what I didn't get to last week. I wanted to bring that as part of that information to you about what years and years of trying to influence culture and focusing on it, we're still a long way off of where the desired end is. Death penalty. These next two issues I won't spend a lot of time on because the church really, as a whole, hasn't spent a lot of energy, a lot of capital, no pun intended, in these two issues. They focused it on others, but capital punishment, the state-sanctioned killing of a person, hasn't been a major issue. We as a whole don't seem to be that united on it. I know a lot of Christians who are just totally, completely against it, think it's completely immoral that we or the government should have any role in ending someone else's life, no matter what they've done. And I know a lot of other people, Christians, who have no problem with that at all if they've been convicted of a violent crime, specifically murder. This is where we stand. 23 states have either repealed it or never instituted it or struck it down as unconstitutional. And 14 states, on the other hand, the red ones, not only do it, but they did it recently. Most likely it's lethal injection or electrocution. 3 states do it by firing squad, which I thought was interesting. 6 states still use the gas chamber, but they no longer use hanging. And of course, Illinois there is green. Anyone remember who was responsible for turning that green? George Ryan, that's right. I had a job in his office, his legislative office, some 20 plus years ago, and I had the wonderful duty of answering phones when this happened and when he did the Illinois first tax hike for the roads, and that was when I started to seriously consider a change in careers. So, from the mid-'60s to the mid-'90s, public support for the death penalty went up dramatically. If you would poll someone, they would say, yes, we're all for it. And then along came DNA. Along came, well, you know what? This person's been wrongfully imprisoned for the past 30 years. Or this person was executed by the state. Oops, right? We've now exonerated this person. That's not a mistake you can go back and fix. So once that started happening, it fell from 80% approval to around 50% today. It's still supported by law enforcement, victims' rights groups. It's opposed by groups like Amnesty International. Here in Illinois, leading the way, of course, George Ryan granted clemencies, and then Pat Quinn finished the job in 2011, commuting the sentences of all the death row inmates still remaining. And like I said, we have a variety of opinion in the church. And one of the reasons why this hasn't been such a big issue in the culture war. You will have some people who will argue and say, well, how can you say you're pro-life if you support this? And then you'll have other people say, so you're fine with killing an innocent baby, but you don't want to do this to a convicted murderer. And on we go. On the debate goes with no end in sight. There were some people say that their position is not in any case whatsoever. I know of other people, you ask them what's their position on the death penalty, and they will say, my position would be right next to the power switch. That is how severe they are in their thinking. Euthanasia, Greek for good death. This is another instance that the church hasn't really, as a whole, gotten involved in, except for a couple of cases which I'll share with you. And part of that is, there are some cases of this that have become acceptable in our society, even in the church. I'm sure some of you might have an advance directive or a DNR. I know that Mike Wickens had a class where we talked about these things, and it was a very personal, very controversial subject, and I'm not focusing on that at all. But it is considered as one of these four, the one I'm not focusing on. There are four types of euthanasia. The active type, the direct administration of a lethal substance by another party with merciful intent. The passive type, which I mentioned earlier. And to be honest, I don't know if I have one of these. I feel stupid for saying that. I know I get asked that whenever I go to the hospital. I guess, I don't know. The indirect type, prescription of painkillers that might be fatal in an attempt to relieve suffering. For some reason, I think of Saving Private Ryan every time I read that. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but where they give morphine to the wounded soldier. And we all know where that's going when they do that. And finally, physician-assisted suicide. This is where the church did become involved, and I wanted to bring up the two cases where this happened. How many of you can guess whose picture I'm going to put up here next? Yeah, very good. Dr. Death. That is not a moniker I would be particularly proud of, but he was nicknamed Dr. Death. Jack Kevorkian was a pathologist and a euthanasia proponent whose motto was, "Dying is not a crime." Now, when he was a child, his parents took him to church every week. And he started questioning the existence of God as he believed that, an all-knowing God, if God's all-knowing, then how come we have these atrocities? His issue specifically was the Armenian genocide from 100 years ago that impacted his family. I think President Biden just now apologized for that or recognized that from, like I said, over 100 years ago. So he stopped attending church by the time he was 12. And he becomes a doctor, and in 1998, he helped a man suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease end his life. And he was arrested in 99. He was paroled 8 years later on the condition that he wouldn't offer any advice, he wouldn't participate, nor be present in any type of suicides. And he couldn't promote it, he couldn't talk about the procedure. That was the condition. So he says, okay, they release him, and he runs for Congress the next year. So there's the notion of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. I might have been gone that day in med school. But anyway, there's the notion of the right to try versus the right to die. This is a map of the states where it's okay. The dark blue ones, the Pacific Coast, Colorado, New England, that's Kevorkian could have done his deeds in any of those blue states. In Montana, it's pending. In all of those peach-colored light states, including Missouri, all of those states this year have a bill in their state legislature making that okay. Don't know how far they'll go, but that's where they're at right now. Illinois, surprisingly, no legislative activity in this session regarding that, but that is where we are, where the notion of a physician-assisted suicide is considered okay, or will be considered, whether it's okay or not. The other person I wanted to mention, and this is really a heartbreaking case, but this brought the church out even more than Kevorkian did, and that is the case of a woman named Terry Schiavo. She was a woman in Florida who had a heart attack or a seizure when she was 26 years old, and she was, anyone remember this case, Terry Schiavo? She was resuscitated, but she had massive brain damage because she went so long without oxygen to her brain, and she was left comatose. So for months, there was no improvement, and they changed her condition to what's called PVS, a persistent vegetative state. But if you've seen the videos, and they are heartbreaking, she recognizes people. She makes all kinds of happy noises when her mother would come to visit her. And a legal battle started between the husband, who wanted to remove her feeding tubes, and the parents, the very Catholic parents, who said, no, we want to do everything we can to save her. And this became a national issue. If you recall, the governor of Florida was the president's brother. And he was trying to get them to save her, prolong her life as long as they could, while the husband, who by this time had moved on to another woman, and I can't say that was why, but he had promised Terry, or there was some understanding that she didn't want to live like this. That was his argument. So there was a back and forth legal argument for years while this woman was going through this particular state. And then in 2005, it went to the courts, and Florida courts, Supreme Court, said remove the tubes. So then the other side got involved, and the U.S. House got involved. The Congress passed a law saying that the state government can intervene, or the Congress can let the intervene if they need to. This brought Jeb Bush and Jesse Jackson together on the same side. That is how strange this issue was, and the alliances it formed. The husband who wanted her feeding tubes removed was backed by the ACLU, and the parents were joined by both the Bushes, president and governor, Jesse Jackson, Catholic Church, and a group which I haven't mentioned yet called the ACLJ, American Center for Law and Justice, sort of the right's counterpoint. Jay Sekulow, I think, is the guy with the ACLJ. But it was all for naught. A federal judge in Florida ordered the removing of the tubes, and they removed the feeding tubes, and she passed away a little while later. Interestingly enough, there was a pastor, William Rice, of the Calvary Baptist Church, quoted after she passed. An innocent woman has died. She was starved to death while the courts that are supposed to protect the most basic liberties of its citizens stood by and did nothing. It's a sad day for America and a sad day for people who love righteousness. What happened here was wrong, and 10,000 judges standing arm in arm from Clearwater to Washington screaming that this is right will never make it so. It was wrong. The judge who ordered the removal of the tubes happened to be a congregant at William Rice's church until he said this and found another church, I guess. So that brought it to the church in a very personal, very local level. So this never really galvanized the pro-life movement even after this. The Catholics have a declaration on euthanasia saying it's a crime against life and a crime against God. To be honest, I don't know how much this extends. I don't know if the Catholic Church thinks that a do not resuscitate order is wrong. Maybe St. John's honors them. I honestly don't know. I don't know if any of you would know. But there are a lot of Protestant churches who are not okay with the Jack Kevorkians of this world, who think that is wrong. Even the most liberal or most mainstream that you would think would be for it, not so much. Any questions on that before I race to the next point? Okay. 9-week class, and I have 20 minutes to talk about gender and sexuality. All right. Okay, sodomy was a capital offense. You could actually be executed for this early on in America. Cross-dressing was a felony. 1962, the first state to decriminalize sodomy. Illinois was the first state to decriminalize it. And I'm racing through these. Stonewall Inn. This was a big event in 1969. There was a gay bar in Greenwich Village in New York City. And the cops had this procedure, had this tradition. Every time there's an election happening, they would raid the gay bars. And it would happen during an election, so they could broadcast to the city that they're taking care of the problem. But this particular bar was run by the mob. This isn't being broadcast to a wide variety of people, is it? I don't want to get the mafia after me or anything. But this time, the people at the bar, the gay people, fought back. And there were riots for 3 days, and this started the movement. And I want to mention really quick, it is about this time, the 50s or 60s, that the word gay became associated with homosexuality. That was one thing I'd always wondered. How did that word, which had for years meant something else, meant happy, come to be a connotation for that? Then we have the gay migration to San Francisco, gay liberation movement, AIDS, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Defense of Marriage Act, the sad case of Matthew Shepard, who was killed in Wyoming, which brought about a change in the hate crimes in the infamous Westboro Baptist Church. I get angered. I didn't even include a picture of that because you know where that would lead. And a lot of people looked at the Westboro Baptist Church who said God hates all homosexuals as a personification of the whole church. Right? All the church believes the way they do, and that was a shameful moment. I'm racing through this because I want to get to where the church gets involved. As we move on, 2014, civil unions are now legal. 2015, Obama seeks to ban conversion therapy. And then we have the big Supreme Court decision that struck down all state bans on same-sex marriage. The next year, same-sex couples could adopt. I included this at the bottom, and I put the law citations down because I knew if I told you this, you would not believe me. Illinois in 1962, some 60 years ago, first state to say sodomy is now not illegal. They're not going to come out and say sodomy is legal. It's just not illegal. There are 2 laws in the books in Illinois right now, and I have the compiled statute citations here. Adultery is a Class A misdemeanor in Illinois. That is sex with another person who is not his or her spouse. Punishable by up to 364 days in jail and or a fine of up to $2,500. These are still in the books. Fornication is a Class B misdemeanor in Illinois. So up to 180 days in jail and or a fine up to $1,500. So sodomy's legal, but you can't commit adultery or fornicate in Illinois. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. I remember watching the show called Soap back in the 70s, and Billy Crystal played this gay character, and I remember how shocked society was, and that's like tame compared to what we have today. I should point out, in case you didn't notice, these 2 laws are rarely, if ever, enforced in Illinois. And aside from the fact that they're never enforced, I'm guessing you don't want to be the politician who says, I want to repeal making adultery and fornication illegal in Illinois. You don't want to be that politician. If you ever hear of an Illinois politician who's wanting to change this, let me know. We'll go down to the Capitol and I'll bring the popcorn, because that will be very interesting to watch, to see if that passes. So I just thought that was fascinating. Today, of course, the big issue involves the transgender or gender identity issues, the communities. The restroom bills. Can a man who identifies as a woman use a restroom that girls use? Remember the controversy surrounding Target being a store that was one of the first to allow that. School sports, parental notification, and consent regarding medical procedures, sexual reassignment surgery. These are issues that the church is going to be getting more involved in. These issues have actually split these 4 denominations. These 4 denominations are no longer whole. They have been split in the past 10 to 15 years because of this very issue, not the transgender, but the gay rights, gay marriage, gay ordination, membership. And I mentioned this, I think, in the first week. The United Methodist Church split over it. That is the most recent. The Episcopal Church, a lot of the Episcopal churches in Africa have been at the center of that separation. Presbyterian Church USA and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, these four denominations. I'm going to move past the history of the feminist movement because that is all a part of this, to talk about how roles of women in the church and in society have affected the church itself. There are two main camps about the role of women in society and in the church that have dominated the discussion. The first one is called the Christian Egalitarianism movement or branch, also known as biblical equality. Women can exercise spiritual authority as pastors, mutual submission without necessarily requiring a hierarchy, and the denominations who tend to back this are called, the Quakers, Methodists, Presbyterians, Northern Baptists, Church of the Nazarene, and even, surprisingly, to some extent, the Assemblies of God. Anyone familiar with that graphic at the top, the TNIV? This was today's New International Version, and this was a Bible that hung around for 9 years before they took it off the shelves because they just went ahead and redid the NIV. And this was a Bible that was to have gender-inclusive language. Any reference to man would be removed for human beings. God made all human beings in his image. I don't know if they changed anything theologically speaking, but the wording changed. Any response to man, of course. And it was met with a lot of controversy. And in 2011, like I said, they stopped publishing that and moved on to something else. But there is a group called Christians for Biblical Equality that's centered in Minneapolis. It's one of these Christian egalitarian organizations, and their mission statement is, "We exist to promote biblical justice and community by educating Christians that the Bible calls women and men to share authority equally in service and leadership in the home, church, and world." Now, we're getting into some recent stuff here because, and I'm talking in the past couple of months. The other side of this coin is what's known as the Complementarianism. This is a word that would win you the spelling bee in my time. Complementarianism. Women and men created equal, but men are to hold authority over women in the home and the church. So men and women have differing and non-overlapping roles, and it's manifested in marriage, it's manifested in church leadership, in Ephesians and New Testament passages of the kind, Catholic Church, Orthodox, Southern Baptist, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, and their group is called, one of the groups that advocate complementarian view, the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Based out of Dallas, they issued, I would encourage you to look at this and let me know what you think if you ever get a chance to look at it, the Nashville Statement of 2017, where they outlined what they believed and why they believed it. It was the whole notion of complementarianism that caused Beth Moore to leave the Southern Baptist Convention a couple of years ago. She said that she was still a Baptist, but she was leaving SBC. She's ending her publishing relationship with Lifeway Christian. She mentioned that the church isn't doing enough on spousal abuse issues. The church isn't doing enough about white supremacy. The church is too involved in Trumpism. And so she thought it would be best to leave the Southern Baptist Convention, that, women should have an equal role. And if you recall, someone asked John MacArthur if he had a message for her. Does any of you remember this? And he said, "Go home." That was his response to Beth Moore. Said it in jest, and of course everybody exploded at him. And so the issue didn't die there because about in the middle of March, if you recall, there was a very disturbed young man who went into a spa in Atlanta, I think, and killed a bunch of Asian American females. And apparently, one of the women of the other movement, blamed people like John MacArthur for their deaths. Rachel Den Hollander, she was a gymnast who pointed out the sexual abuse of a Michigan State. His first name was Larry, I forget his last name, but he was a very prominent U.S. Olympic gym coach, and he was accused of sexual abuse and convicted. So she tweets this: the man who murdered women in a massage parlor yesterday says he was eliminating temptation because he had a sex addiction. He was a baptized member of an SBC church. Brothers, pastors, seminary heads, how you teach sexuality matters. It can be life and death. And I don't know if you can read that at the bottom. It is in how Jane, hypothetical Jane, was treated by John MacArthur. And Beth Moore replies 1,000 amens. So this is an issue that is impacting the church, and it's splitting an organization as big as the SBC. And it's happening today. So some challenges for us as I conclude this class. We have challenges as a church from the outside and the inside in straying from our God-given mission and worrying about where society is headed. So it's easy to look at the world today and think that the dominoes are about to fall, right? The court's dealing with marriage. Next, they're going to target small businesses. Next, it'll be colleges and nonprofits, churches themselves. You know, I wonder this too. I don't worry about it as much anymore, but I would wonder, when will it stop? Will it stop? What are they going to do if a church like ours says we're not going to ordain someone because they're gay or have membership or any sort of leadership role? What's going to happen? So there are a couple of people who have tried to buck the system and succeeded. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the baker who wouldn't bake the cake. Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. There was a baker by the name of Phillips who wouldn't do a cake for a gay wedding. And of course he was sued, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they sided with him. What I find humorous about the New York Times, there's another subject that could take a while. The thing I find humorous about this particular headline, narrow decision. It was 7-2. I'm guessing the word narrow is an editorial statement of theirs. So anyway, they said that he had the right to not bake that cake. And then in Kentucky, there was a Christian man, Blaine Adamson, who ran Hands On Originals, a T-shirt company in Lexington. The Gay Lesbian Services Organization wanted him to make T-shirts for Pride Month. He refused, and the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled in favor of him. But these victories are few and far between. On the back, I have the Equality Act text, some of the text from the Equality Act that is currently passed the U.S. House. President Biden said, please send this to my desk and I'll sign it. It expands the definition of public accommodations to include places or establishments that provide things like exhibitions, recreation, exercise, amusement, gatherings, or displays. It adds sexual orientation and gender identity to that list of things that we will not discriminate against, federal government. Race, color, gender, whatever. It adds this wording to it. So it's hard to tell how far this will go. There's a part of me that thinks, well, I shouldn't worry anyway, right? The Bible kind of says something about that. There's a part of me that thinks, okay, well, the Catholic Church has had this tradition forever about women not being priests, and that's still legal for them to do that, right? There hasn't been any lawsuits on that. And there's another part of me that thinks they never stop with these litigious acts. I see this happening, and it's like if you're a Star Trek fan, you see that actor wearing the red sweater, you think something bad's about to happen, right? That's how I feel when I see something like this, that, I just don't trust that the judges are going to get it right. It's just they're going to keep chipping away. So that brings me to, I've mentioned government intrusion and all the thoughts emanating from that, and now I want to get to the threats we have from the inside. I won't get to Francis Schaeffer. But here's a quote. Who said this? The meaning of Easter is more transcendent than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Whether you are a Christian or not, through a commitment to helping others, we are able to save ourselves. The person who said that was U.S. Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock this Easter. He was just elected to the United States Senate from Georgia in those special Georgia Senate elections. He is the gentleman who is the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. They had another popular pastor back in the day. Anyone know who that would have been? Martin Luther King, Jr. And so he tweeted this. This was an Easter morning tweet from a pastor saying that whether you're a Christian or not, through a commitment to helping others, we're able to save ourselves. And within about an hour, this tweet has been deleted. They said the tweet was posted by staff and it wasn't approved. So anyway, Reverend Senator or Senator Reverend, I don't know which it is, one of those, or Warnock says, his theology is rooted in the black liberation theology that sees life through the lens of racial oppression, the idea that anything that doesn't liberate isn't consistent with Jesus. So it's easy to get discouraged by observing America and the world, but thankfully our faith isn't based on who runs our government or how big our church is. As I say, it's not who's in the White House, it's who's in God's house. I've been thinking about my own thesis statement about the church and culture, and here's where I fall on it. And you're free to disagree with me on it, but I think it is our mission, it is our church's God-given mission to reach the lost and to edify the saints. That is our mission. And I'm not saying that all the problems we see with social justice and racism are something that we should not address, not at all. But if the church isn't for that, if we don't get an edifying message of the saints, if that doesn't happen at church, where is it going to happen? If we're just focusing on social gospel issues, anytime you divert from the God-given mission of the church with a different agenda, you will depart radically from that agenda. If you become a church that thinks the social gospel is just as important, you get this. You get heresy. And again, my thesis is it's the role of the church. I guess it depends on what you call the church. It's the role of the church to fulfill the Great Commission, edify the saints, reach the lost. Do we have a responsibility to seek justice in our culture, in our society? Of course we do. If we don't do it, same question I asked earlier, if the church doesn't do it, if Christians don't do it, who does? I think it's the church's role to minister to the lost and edify the saints. The role of changing our world is a role for Brian and Alice and for Gary and Marcia, as God has gifted us to do it in our own individual ways and lives. So that's what I think. I don't think we can turn a blind eye to injustice in our world. And one abiding thought, I saw this, I shared this in my last Awakenings class. I was driving home through Leland Grove, not to Leland Grove, unfortunately, but driving home from Leland Grove. I saw these signs everywhere that said, everything will be okay. I thought, that's a great thing to end it on. Everything will be okay. God is in control. So I hope you've enjoyed my lectures in this class, gotten something out of it. But be encouraged, be strong and courageous. We serve a mighty God who is mightier than all the forces that are arrayed against us in this culture. So God bless you and thank you. Oh, we're going.